In the small town of Hollow Creek, an icy fog hangs heavy over the streets, and an eerie silence fills the air. Sheriff Alan Bennett arrives at a chilling scene, and Titan, a loyal German shepherd, found hanging from a cross at the old chapel. As the townsfolk whisper of a curse and a series of unexplained deaths, Alan is determined to uncover the truth behind this dark mystery. What happens next will test his courage, his belief, and his connection with the dog that just might hold the key to it all. Why was Titan marked as the cursed one? Watch the video to discover the shocking truth behind this haunting tale. The morning in Hollow Creek was colder than usual. A thick fog clung to the dirt roads, turning everything it touched into a pale shadow. Alan, a seasoned sheriff with years of experience under his belt, stepped out of his patrol car, his boots crunching on the frozen gravel. He was used to the silence of small towns, but today something was different. The usual quiet was pierced by whispers, the kind of whispers that only carried fear. As he walked toward the old chapel at the edge of town, a chill ran down his spine. He had been called to investigate a strange occurrence, something the locals had already begun to talk about in hushed tones. What he found when he pushed open the chapel door made his breath catch in his throat. There, hanging from a wooden cross, was Titan. The German shepherd, once full of life, now hung lifeless. His body swayed slightly in the cold wind that had begun to pick up, his fur matted with blood, frozen in place. His eyes, though dull with exhaustion, still carried a glimmer of something. Pain, yes, but more than that. A silent plea. Above him, nailed to the cross, was a sign that read, "Cursed by God." Alan's heart raced as he approached, the scene unfolding before him like something out of a nightmare. He had seen many things in his time, murders, accidents, heart-wrenching loss, but nothing could prepare him for this. A dog, a creature of loyalty and love, left to suffer this way. His mind raced. Why? Why was this happening? Who could do such a thing? His first instinct was to remove the dog from the cross, but the villagers were already gathering outside, their whispers growing louder. He could feel their eyes on him, the weight of their superstitions settling in like a heavy fog. As Alan cut the ropes that bound Titan to the cross, the dog barely moved. It took everything in Alan not to let his own anger and confusion get the best of him. He gently cradled Titan's trembling body in his arms, wrapping his jacket around the dog for warmth. The whispering continued behind him. "It's the cursed one," an old voice murmured. "It's the one from last winter. Every time it appears, someone dies." Alan's jaw clenched as he walked back toward his patrol car, Titan still weak and trembling in his arms. This was no curse. This was something much darker. He had to find out who would do something like this to an innocent animal, and why. As he loaded Titan into the back of the car, his mind kept returning to the sign, the words "cursed by God" etched into his thoughts. He didn't believe in curses, but someone wanted him to. Someone was trying to send a message, and Alan was determined to uncover it. The snow had begun to fall heavier now, dusting the ground with a quiet, icy layer. Alan's boots crunched against the frozen earth as he made his way back to his patrol car. He glanced over his shoulder at the growing crowd that had gathered around the chapel. The whispers had turned to murmurs of fear, their voices thick with superstition. "You'd better watch out, Deputy," Earl Mathers, an older man with a gray beard and a worn face, said as he approached Alan. His voice trembled, not from the cold, but from something deeper. "That dog. It's the cursed one. They say it's been around for years. Every time it shows up, someone dies." Alan didn't respond right away. His eyes stayed fixed on the crowd that had gathered near the chapel, their faces pale, their hands clutching rosaries or each other for comfort. The townsfolk were frightened, their belief in the curse hanging heavy in the air like an oppressive fog. Earl stepped closer, his hand shaking as he spoke. "Last winter, it was the Millers. Before that, the Andersons. People just drop dead. And the dog is always there, lurking around, watching." Alan could see the fear in the old man's eyes, but he wouldn't let it sway him. Superstition, that's all it was. People didn't die because of a dog. It was something else, something darker. that Alan needed to get to the bottom of. He wasn't about to let fear control this town. "Thank you, Earl, but I'm not going to buy into that," Alan said, his voice steady. "I'll deal with this my way." Earl gave him a desperate look, but Alan walked past him, making his way to the back of the patrol car. As he opened the door, he could feel the eyes of the townsfolk on him, their judgment heavy and unspoken. But he had a job to do. And right now, that job was saving this dog, this innocent animal, from whatever twisted story the town had built around it. He placed Titan gently in the back of the car, the dog's body still trembling from the cold and the pain. The whispers continued, but Alan didn't listen. He slammed the door shut with a solid thud, his mind focused on the task at hand. As he got in the driver's seat and started the engine, the murmur of the crowd faded into the distance. Alan's heart was heavy with the weight of the situation. He had no doubt that something sinister was going on, but it wasn't about curses. It was about finding the truth. The snow fell harder now, a blur of white against the gray sky. Alan drove down the road, his mind racing. There was more to this story than anyone in Hollow Creek realized. Someone wanted him to believe in a curse, to make him second-guess everything he knew. But Alan wasn't going to fall for it. The road ahead was dark, but it was clear in his mind. He had to get answers. He had to know who would do this to a defenseless animal, and more importantly, why. The engine hummed steadily as Alan drove through the snowy streets, the headlights cutting through the dark like a beacon. Titan's soft, labored breathing was the only sound in the car, a constant reminder of the dog's suffering. Alan glanced in the rearview mirror, seeing Titan's limp form curled up in the back seat, his fur matted with blood and snow. The dog's pain was evident, yet it was hard to ignore the strange bond that seemed to form between them. Despite the trauma Titan had endured, there was a quiet trust in the way the dog leaned slightly toward him, as if seeking comfort in the only protector he knew. As Alan made his way toward the veterinary clinic, a deep unease settled in his chest. He had saved the dog, but that didn't feel like the end of it. He couldn't shake the nagging thought that something bigger was at play here. It was as if Titan's suffering had opened a door to a much darker truth, one that Alan had yet to uncover. He pulled up to Clara Whitmore's clinic, the small building nestled at the edge of town. The lights flickered faintly inside, casting a warm glow through the cold air. Alan stepped out of the car, taking a steadying breath before walking around to the back to lift Titan out of the vehicle. The dog remained still, his body limp in Alan's arms as he carried him inside. Clara, a tall, graceful woman with auburn hair, looked up from the desk as Alan entered. She immediately rose to her feet, her eyes scanning Titan's body as she stepped closer. "Oh my God," Clara whispered, her voice filled with shock. "What happened to him?" He was left hanging in the old chapel," Alan explained, gently laying Titan down on the examination table. "I found him barely alive. He's weak, but he's still breathing. I thought he'd be dead by now." Clara moved swiftly, her hands delicate but efficient, as she began checking Titan's vitals. She ran a thermometer along his side, noting the low temperature, and carefully checked his heart rate. Titan's breathing was shallow, his body trembling from the cold and exhaustion. "His body temperature is dangerously low," Clara muttered, her brow furrowed with concern. "But there's hope. He's a fighter." Alan stepped back, crossing his arms as he watched her work. There was a strange tension in the air, a connection he couldn't explain. He had always thought of animals as loyal companions, but something about Titan's quiet suffering seemed to tug at something deeper in him. Maybe it was the dog's eyes, or the way they held a certain understanding, as if Titan knew what Alan was feeling, even if Alan himself wasn't sure. Clara's voice broke through his thoughts. "He's lucky you found him when you did," she said softly, looking at Alan with a knowing glance. "But it's going to take time for him to heal." Alan nodded, though his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't help but feel an inexplicable pull toward Titan. The dog had been through hell, yet he still had fight in him. It was as if there was a bond between them, something unspoken that Alan couldn't quite understand. "I'll stay with him," Alan said quietly, his eyes lingering on Titan's frail form. "He's been through too much already." Clara paused, her hands stilling for a moment as she looked at him. "You've got a strange connection with him," she remarked. "I can see it in your eyes. You're not just saving him. You're trying to save something else, too." Alan swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling over him. She was right. There was more to this than just rescuing a dog. He felt a responsibility that went beyond the immediate crisis. But why? Why was he so determined to protect Titan? What was it about this dog that stirred something so deep inside him? Before he could respond, Clara turned back to Titan, carefully adjusting the heat lamps above him to keep him warm. Alan watched her work, the unease in his chest growing. There were answers waiting, but they were still out of reach. One thing was certain, though. Titan wasn't just any dog. He had a purpose, and Alan had a role to play in it. The room fell silent, save for the quiet beeping of the heart monitor and the soft crackling of the heater. Alan stood there, feeling the weight of the situation press against him. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he was certain of one thing. He couldn't walk away from this. Not now. Not with the mystery surrounding Titan still unsolved. The door to the clinic creaked open, and Alan turned to see Reverend Andre standing in the doorway, his tall figure cloaked in a long black coat. His presence was imposing, yet his eyes held a strange calmness, as though he had seen all there was to see and was now beyond caring. Alan felt a small ripple of unease as the Reverend stepped inside, the chill of the outside air following him in. "Deputy Bennett?" Andre said, his voice smooth but carrying an undertone that Alan didn't trust. "I heard about the dog." His gaze flickered toward Titan, who lay on the table, still weak but breathing steadily. Andre's eyes narrowed as if he could see something Alan could not, something sinister about the dog's presence. Clara, who had been adjusting the IV drip, stiffened at his words, but Alan wasn't sure if it was the Reverend's presence or the tone of his voice that made her uneasy. "Titan is a survivor," Alan said firmly, his voice colder than he intended. He wasn't in the mood for Andre's cryptic words or the way he always seemed to twist every situation to fit his beliefs. "And he's not a threat." Andre's eyes lingered on Alan for a moment before shifting back to the dog. "That's where you're wrong," he said, his voice dropping slightly, as if he were sharing some hidden truth. "It's a curse, a warning. That animal, it's been marked by something far darker than we can comprehend." Alan felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice steady. "It's not a curse, it's just a dog, Reverend." Andre took a step closer, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture relaxed but rigid with an unsettling confidence. "Do you know the history of that dog? It's the same one that appeared before the Millers died. It was there when the Andersons' baby died, and the Dawsons, too. Every time it appears, death follows." Alan shook his head, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. He had grown tired of hearing the town's superstitions, tired of everyone pointing fingers at Titan as if he were some harbinger of doom. "I don't believe in curses, Reverend," Alan said, his voice firm, a little more than he meant to let slip. Andre tilted his head slightly, studying Alan with a piercing gaze that made Alan's skin crawl. "Maybe you should," Andre said quietly, "because this curse has been around for much longer than you realize. It isn't just a coincidence. It's a warning." Alan's hand instinctively clenched into a fist. His patience was wearing thin. He had always respected Andre. He was a man of faith, after all. But this was different. There was something about the way Andre spoke that felt off, like he was using the idea of faith as a shield to hide his own twisted intentions. "And you're sure about that?" Alan said, his voice thick with disbelief. "You're saying this dog, Titan, is the one responsible for all the deaths in this town?" Andre nodded, his expression cold. "I'm not saying the dog itself is to blame, but it carries with it a curse, a shadow that brings death to those it visits, and it's come to Hollow Creek to finish what it started." Clara, who had remained silent up until now, looked uneasily between the two men. "Reverend, we've been through this," she said softly. "There's no curse. We're not going to solve anything by believing in superstition." Andre's eyes flickered with something almost imperceptible, a flash of annoyance, but he quickly masked it. "Perhaps you're right, Dr. Whitmore, but the truth doesn't always reveal itself through logic." He turned his gaze back to Alan, a knowing look in his eyes. "You may not believe me now, Deputy, but soon enough, you'll see. You'll see that the curse is real." Alan exhaled slowly, his mind racing. He couldn't let Andre's words cloud his judgment. He had to focus on the facts, not this madness. The Reverend's cryptic behavior only made Alan more determined to find the truth. Whatever was happening in this town, it wasn't because of some supernatural curse. It was something else. Alan watched as Andre turned to leave, his steps slow and deliberate. "We'll see, Deputy. We'll see how long you can deny the truth," Andre called over his shoulder. As the door closed behind him, Alan felt a weight settle over him. The Reverend's words lingered in the air, thick with menace. Alan turned to Clara, his gaze hard. "I don't trust him." Clara nodded in agreement, her face drawn with concern. "Neither do I. But I can't deny there's something off about all of this." Alan's mind raced. There was something Andre was hiding, something more than just superstition, and he was going to find it. Alan couldn't shake the feeling that Andre was hiding something. The cryptic warnings, the way the Reverend had danced around the truth, it all felt too calculated. The town was caught in a web of fear, and Andre was at the center of it all. Alan's gut told him there was more to this than just superstition. The wind howled outside the clinic, but inside Alan's focus was razor sharp. Clara was sitting at the desk, flipping through the town's old records and medical files. The silence between them was thick, as if they were both waiting for something to click. "We need to dig deeper," Alan said, breaking the silence. His eyes were fixed on the file in Clara's hands. "Andre is connected to these deaths somehow. I can feel it." Clara hesitated before speaking. "But where do we start? All we have is Titan, and his presence here doesn't explain the deaths." Alan nodded. "No, but it's a start. We've been so focused on the dog, we've overlooked the pattern. These deaths, they've been happening for years. What if Andre is somehow behind them?" Clara looked up, a spark of realization in her eyes. "You're right. There's been something odd about the timing of these deaths. They always seem to happen just after Titan is spotted." Alan felt a chill creep up his spine as the pieces began to fall into place. What if Titan isn't the cause? What if he's the one trying to warn us? Clara quickly pulled out a stack of medical files, flipping through them, until she stopped at one particular case. She slid the file across the desk to Alan. "This," she said, her voice low, "this is the Miller family. They were the first to die after Titan was seen around their property last year." Alan opened the file. The report was short and blunt. Cause of death, food poisoning. High levels of a toxic chemical found in the victim's system, no signs of foul play. "That's not right," Alan muttered. "Food poisoning doesn't happen out of nowhere. Someone had to have poisoned them. And it matches what we found in the previous cases, the same chemical, the same symptoms." Clara nodded. "That's the connection. The same thing happened with the Andersons and the Dawsons too. The pattern is undeniable." Alan's mind raced as he pieced together the terrifying reality. The deaths were deliberate. Someone's been poisoning these families, and Titan has been showing up each time trying to warn us. Clara sat back, crossing her arms. But who would do this? And why? Alan stood up abruptly, his thoughts racing. "It's Andre, I'm sure of it now. The chemical used in the poison. It's not something you can just buy at a store. It's industrial grade. The kind of thing only someone with access to certain resources would have." Clara looked uncertain. "But why would Andre do this? He's a man of God." Alan's jaw tightened. Maybe that's exactly why. What if his grief over his daughter's death is clouding his judgment? What if he believes he's doing the right thing, punishing the wicked to save the town? Clara's face paled. "You're saying he's been poisoning families because he thinks they deserve it?" Alan met her gaze, his eyes grim. "I think he's been using his position to cover up his actions, hiding behind his faith. And Titan's been a witness to it all." A heavy silence settled between them as they both considered the horrifying reality. Alan knew they were on the right track, but the pieces of the puzzle were still scattered. He had to confront Andre, but the Reverend was a slippery man, always one step ahead, always ready with an explanation. Alan wasn't sure how much longer he could keep playing by Andre's rules. Clara glanced at the clock. What now? We keep digging, Alan said, determination creeping into his voice. We need to find out exactly how Andre's involved and what he's hiding behind those closed doors. He grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair. This isn't over yet. Not by a long shot. The evening was colder than usual, the wind biting through the thin walls of Alan's office. He sat at his desk, flipping through file after file, searching for something, anything, that could help him understand Reverend Andre's twisted motivations. But nothing was clicking. The town's history, the deaths, the rumors, all of it felt like a tangled mess he couldn't untangle. Alan rubbed his temples, frustration building. Andre was too calm, too controlled, and the more Alan thought about it, the more he realized that the Reverend's calm demeanor was a mask. Behind it lay something dark, something that Alan had to uncover if he was ever going to stop the poison spreading through Hollow Creek. That's when he remembered the old records in the town hall, the ones detailing the personal history of the town's most influential residents. He needed to know more about Andre, about his past. Alan wasn't just chasing a suspect. He was chasing the root of a tragedy that had been buried for far too long. An hour later, Alan stood in front of the file cabinet at the town hall. He pulled out the yellowed folder labeled Andre Hale and flipped it open. The first thing he saw was a photo of a young woman smiling with a bright, joyful face, Amelia, the Reverend's daughter. There was an aura of innocence about her, a sharp contrast to the man who had so carefully hidden his pain. Alan read through the file, his heart sinking as he learned more about Andre's past. Amelia had been just a teenager when she died, struck down by a sudden illness that had baffled the doctors. The file listed the cause of death as infection, but there were no clear answers as to why. One thing was certain: her father had never accepted it. The Reverend had been devastated by the loss. Amelia's death had consumed him, shattered the image of the man of God he had once been. But what caught Alan's attention was the letter hidden deep within the file. It was from Andre to the town's council, dated just a few weeks after Amelia's funeral. It read, "I have seen the face of evil. I have seen the hand of death, and it took my daughter. A dog, yes, a dog, attacked her. It was rabid, mad with rage, and it bit her in the neck. The infection spread like wildfire. God did not protect her, but that animal, this creature, did. I know what I must do." Alan's stomach twisted. The dog. He had thought it was just a small part of the tragedy, but Andre had built his entire belief system around it. He blamed the dog's bite for Amelia's death, and that was where it all started. The curse. The belief that dogs were vessels of evil, bringing death and destruction. Andre's twisted grief had morphed into something far more dangerous, a crusade. He began preaching that dogs, especially those with dark coats, were vessels of evil, and that their presence marked the onset of death. In his mind, Amelia's death wasn't just an accident, it was divine retribution, a sign that the world had turned against him. And in his grief-stricken mind, the only way to stop this cycle of death was to eliminate the source, the dogs. Alan slammed the file shut, the weight of Andre's twisted logic settling over him. This wasn't just a case of superstition, this was a man who had used his grief as a justification for murder. And Titan. Titan had been a part of this twisted belief from the very beginning. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but Alan knew this was just the beginning. There was more to uncover, more to understand. He wasn't done yet. He couldn't be. Alan sat at his desk, the file in front of him, his mind racing with everything he had uncovered. The pieces were all there, fitting together like a puzzle, but the weight of the truth was heavy. Reverend Andre had twisted his grief into a weapon, turning his town into a breeding ground for fear and superstition. Alan was certain now that the Reverend was behind the deaths, using Titan as a scapegoat, a symbol of evil that didn't exist. But still, there was a part of Alan that hesitated. Should he continue? The people of Hollow Creek had already begun to turn against him. The whispers had started again. about the cursed dog, about the sheriff who dared to stand against the town's beliefs. He could feel it. The cold stares, the distance. His own friends, his own neighbors were pulling away from him. Was he doing the right thing? Alan clenched his fists, frustration bubbling inside him. He had always been a man of logic, a man of facts. But the people in this town were lost in fear, wrapped tightly in their superstitions. Could he really fight that? Could he convince them that Titan wasn't evil, that the deaths weren't the result of some curse, but the product of a twisted, vengeful mind? The thought gnawed at him, but there was no going back now. He couldn't ignore it. Titan had been abused, manipulated, and used as a pawn in Andre's sick game, and if he stopped now, Alan would be no better than those who allowed the Reverend's lies to fester. A knock at the door broke him from his thoughts. He looked up to see Clara standing there, her face etched with concern. "Alan, we need to talk," she said, stepping into the room. Alan sighed. "I know. You think I should stop. I can see it in your eyes." Clara shook her head, her expression soft. "I don't think you should stop, but I do think you should be careful. The town is getting more and more worked up. They're convinced Titan is cursed, and if they think you're protecting him, they'll turn on you too." Alan rubbed his face, exhausted. "I know, I can feel it. They're all looking at me like I'm crazy, like I've lost my mind. But I can't let Andre get away with this. If I back down now, I'll never forgive myself. Titan deserves better." Clara's gaze softened, but her tone was still cautious. "I know you're right. But be careful, Alan. You're walking a fine line here. If the town believes this curse is real, if they think you're fighting against them, they could turn on you. And if Andre's behind this, well, we know how dangerous he can be." Alan's jaw tightened. He knew Clara was right. The tension in Hollow Creek was palpable, and it was only growing worse. The townsfolk were terrified. Every time Titan was seen, more people died. At least that's what they believed. They saw death in every shadow, every whisper of wind. And now, they saw Alan as a threat to their fragile sense of control. "I know the risks," Alan said, standing up and walking toward the window, looking out at the town. "But I can't just let this go. I'm not going to let a man like Andre hide behind his faith and keep hurting people. I have to stop him, and I have to protect Titan. If I don't, who will?" Clara was silent for a moment, watching him. Then she spoke softly. "Just promise me you'll be careful. You don't have to do this alone, Alan. I'm with you. But we need to stay smart. The people in this town are scared. And when people are scared, they do stupid things." Alan turned to her, meeting her gaze. "I won't back down, Clara. Not now. I've come too far." Clara sighed and gave him a small, reluctant smile. "Just don't get yourself killed, okay?" Alan nodded, a heavy weight still pressing on his chest. The truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered, but at what cost? His role as sheriff wasn't just about solving crimes, it was about protecting the people. But what if the people weren't ready to be saved? The clock ticked on, each passing second pushing him closer to a confrontation he wasn't sure he was ready for. The days following the rescue felt heavier than Alan had expected. Each moment spent with Titan in the small clinic seemed to draw him closer to the dog, and yet further into the mystery that loomed over Hollow Creek. Alan had seen many animals in need of care, but there was something different about Titan, something deeper, almost unexplainable. The bond they were forming was unlike anything Alan had ever experienced. Titan was no longer the trembling, broken creature he had found hanging on the cross. His wounds were healing, and his body was regaining strength under Clara's careful watch. But it was more than just physical healing. Alan could feel a shift in the air, a quiet understanding between them. Titan trusted him, and that trust wasn't something Alan had taken lightly. The first time Alan saw it, he almost didn't believe it. Titan had been restless, pacing around the clinic, clearly agitated by the tension in the air. Alan approached him slowly, crouching to meet the dog's level. He held out his hand, unsure of what to expect. For a moment, Titan stopped. his amber eyes meeting Alan's with an intensity that took Alan's breath away. Then Titan did something Alan hadn't expected. He lowered his head, gently nuzzling Alan's hand with a soft whine. It wasn't the usual behavior of a dog that had been abused. It was a gesture of trust, pure and simple. Alan's heart clenched. This was more than just a dog trying to survive. It was a creature seeking connection, seeking help. And here was Alan offering it. "Hey there, buddy," Alan murmured, his voice low and steady. "You're safe now. You can trust me." From that moment, Alan noticed a change. Every time he entered the room, Titan's ears would perk up. He would follow Alan's movements with his eyes, a silent connection that spoke louder than words. When Alan fed him, Titan would eat slowly, savoring the food, but always keeping one eye on Alan, as if waiting for a sign that everything would be okay. Over time, the bond deepened. Titan would follow Alan around the clinic, quietly sitting by his side when Alan worked. There was a certain calmness about the dog now, as if Titan had accepted that he wasn't alone in the world anymore. And with every passing day, that connection grew stronger. At night, when Alan stayed behind to watch over Titan, he would sit by the dog's side. He could hear Titan's steady breathing, and though the dog still flinched at loud noises or sudden movements, there was a sense of peace between them. Alan knew he wasn't just taking care of Titan's body, he was healing something deeper, a part of Titan that had been broken, not just by the cruelty of others, but by the loneliness of being unloved. As the days wore on, Alan found himself talking to Titan more often. His voice would be soft, filled with a mix of reassurance and reflection. Sometimes he would share his thoughts about the case, about his own struggles, as if the dog could understand. And in the quiet of the clinic, Alan would almost believe that Titan did. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden light through the clinic's small windows, Alan reached out to scratch Titan's head. The dog leaned into his touch, closing his eyes as if savoring the moment. "You've been through so much," Alan murmured. "But you're not alone anymore. I'll make sure of that." The simple trust Titan placed in him without hesitation stirred something deep inside Alan. It was a reminder of the power of loyalty, of unconditional love, and of the connections that could be forged between humans and animals. In the midst of all the chaos and fear, Alan realized something. Titan wasn't just a victim. He was a symbol of survival, of resilience, and perhaps most importantly, of the bonds that could change lives. And in that moment, Alan understood that no matter what happened in Hollow Creek, Titan would be by his side. The air in Hollow Creek had grown thick with tension. The town's fear was palpable, and every passing day felt like a countdown to something inevitable. Alan could feel the weight of the superstition pressing down on him, but the more he investigated, the more convinced he became that it wasn't just fear or an ancient curse at play. Andre was behind the deaths, hiding his actions behind the town's misguided beliefs. As he sat in his patrol car, staring at the faint outline of the chapel in the distance, Alan was torn. His heart knew the truth, but the town was gripped by a powerful superstition that was hard to break. If he continued pushing forward, he risked becoming the very thing they feared. They already called him mad for defying the curse, and yet Alan couldn't stop. He couldn't let the town fall any further into the hands of Andre. His thoughts were interrupted by the sharp crackle of his radio. It was a call to the Miller property just outside the town. Another case of poisoning. Alan's stomach tightened as he floored the gas pedal. This was no coincidence. The pattern was clear now. The poisoned families, the sickness, and the whispers of the cursed dog. It all led back to Andre and his twisted idea of divine punishment. The superstition was a mask, hiding the true killer in plain sight. When Alan arrived at the Miller house, the situation was worse than he had feared. A middle-aged man, Gary Miller, was collapsed on the kitchen floor, unconscious but still breathing. His wife, Debbie, was frantic trying to keep him awake. "We were fine," she sobbed. "We just had a little dinner, and now Now he's like this. What's happening to us? Alan immediately got to work, checking the man's vitals as Debbie explained what had happened. They'd eaten a simple meal. Nothing out of the ordinary, just potatoes, some vegetables, and a piece of chicken. But as he looked around the kitchen, something caught his eye. On the counter beside the sink was a half-empty jar of salt. But it wasn't just salt, it was discolored. Alan reached for it carefully, his instincts kicking in. This wasn't ordinary salt. He poured a small amount onto a plate and noticed the faint yellowish tint, almost imperceptible to the untrained eye. The poison. It was the same chemical Alan had seen in the previous reports. Industrial-grade poison, used to contaminate the food and water supply. The same poison that had been in the Miller family's system before they had fallen ill. Alan's heart raced. This wasn't a curse. This was a deliberate act of murder masked by superstition. Someone in the town was poisoning these families, and Andre was somehow involved. The Reverend had used the town's fear as a cover for his crimes, making them believe in a curse while he carried out his twisted agenda. Alan's mind was a whirl of thoughts as he looked at Debbie, who was clutching her husband's limp hand. "I'm going to get Gary to the hospital," he said, trying to calm her, "but I need you to tell me exactly what you ate, everything. Don't leave anything out." She nodded, her voice shaky. It was just a normal dinner, but there was something strange about the chicken. It tasted off, like it had been sitting out too long. Alan's eyes hardened. That explained the slow poisoning. It wasn't just random, it was calculated. Whoever was behind this had poisoned the food slowly, in a way that would go unnoticed until it was too late. As Alan loaded Gary into the back of the patrol car, a new wave of determination washed over him. The town was afraid of a curse, but it wasn't a curse they needed to fear. It was the man who had manipulated their beliefs. Andre had been hiding in plain sight, using his power as a religious leader to poison the hearts and minds of the people. Alan couldn't back down now. He had to expose the truth before more people died. He knew it wouldn't be easy. The town's beliefs were too strong, and Andre had too many followers who would do anything to protect him. But the truth was out there, and Alan wasn't going to stop until he found it. Alan's mind raced as he drove back to the sheriff's station, Gary Miller's condition growing more critical by the minute. His pulse quickened as the pieces of the puzzle started to click into place. Titan wasn't the source of the deaths. Andre was. The Reverend had been using the superstition surrounding the dog to mask his own actions, poisoning the food and water supply of the townspeople with industrial-grade chemicals. Each death, each tragedy, was nothing more than a part of his twisted plan. The more Alan thought about it, the more everything made sense. The timing of the deaths, the appearance of Titan, and everything had been manipulated. Andre had created the perfect cover using the town's deep-seated fear of a curse to deflect any suspicion, but Alan knew the truth now. The question that lingered in his mind was, how far had Andre gone? He couldn't shake the image of the old chapel. The Reverend's place of power, where the townspeople gathered in reverence to the man who was hiding his true nature behind his pious exterior. Alan knew he needed to go deeper, to investigate the chapel itself. Andre had used his position as a religious leader to manipulate the townsfolk, but what if there were more secrets hidden within those walls? Alan made his way to the chapel after dropping off Gary at the hospital. The air felt heavier as he approached the familiar building, the place that had once been a symbol of hope and faith for the people of Hollow Creek. But now, it felt like a tomb, a place where truth was buried beneath layers of lies. The chapel was quiet, the sound of Alan's footsteps echoing through the empty halls. He made his way to the back, where the storage room and the Reverend's office were located. The door was slightly ajar, and Alan pushed it open carefully, not wanting to alert anyone inside. The room smelled of incense, old wood, and dust, a sharp contrast to the unsettling feeling that hung in the air. Alan's eyes scanned the room, looking for anything that would give him the final pieces of the puzzle. His gaze landed on a desk piled high with papers. He rifled through them, his heart racing. It wasn't long before he found what he was looking for, a set of letters and documents, each more damning than the last. One letter in particular stood out. It was from a supplier of chemicals, confirming the delivery of the industrial-grade poison. Andre had ordered it, knowing full well how dangerous it was. He had arranged to have the poison mixed into the food and water supply, using the town's superstition to distract everyone from what was really happening. The pieces clicked into place. Andre wasn't just hiding behind his faith, he was a killer. The dog, Titan, had been the scapegoat all along. Titan wasn't the source of the curse, he was the symbol of Andre's guilt. Alan's stomach turned as he realized the truth. He was no longer just investigating the deaths. He was investigating a man who had taken the lives of innocent people, using faith and superstition as his weapons. Alan's anger surged. Andre had manipulated the town, had used their fear as a shield for his own twisted vendetta, and now it was time to expose him for the murderer he truly was. Alan stood in the dimly lit room, the weight of the discovery pressing on him. He had to stop this. The town needed to know the truth. But he also knew that confronting Andre wouldn't be easy. The Reverend had the power of the town behind him, and exposing the truth would come with a cost. The chapel was empty, save for the flickering candlelight that cast long shadows across the worn wooden pews. Alan stood just inside the entrance, his heart pounding, as he surveyed the familiar space that had become so ominous in the wake of his investigation. Reverend Andre was at the altar, standing tall, his back turned to Alan. The man was calm, almost serene, as if he knew what was coming. Alan's fists clenched. This wasn't just a confrontation. This was the final reckoning. The Reverend had to be stopped. "Reverend Andre?" Alan's voice broke the silence, firm and steady. Andre slowly turned around, his face an unreadable mask. The years of grief, anger, and madness were hidden behind his eyes, but Alan could see the flicker of something else, something darker. "I knew you'd come," Andre said softly, his voice calm, but with an undercurrent of something more sinister. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out. The truth always comes to light, eventually." Alan's jaw tightened. "You've been killing people, Andre, poisoning the families in this town, using them as pawns in your sick crusade." Andre's gaze didn't falter. "I've done what was necessary," he said, his voice almost apologetic. "The town was filled with sin, corruption. It needed cleansing, and God showed me the way." Alan felt a surge of anger rise in his chest. "Cleansing?" he spat, his fists trembling. "You murdered them. You used their fear and faith to hide behind your own twisted grief." Andre took a step toward him, his hands clasped together in a prayer-like gesture. "You don't understand, Alan," he said, his voice softer now, as if trying to make Alan see reason. "They were all guilty, every last one of them. The Millers, the Dawsons, the Andersons. They were all tainted, and they brought this death upon themselves. Their sins were too great, and their souls needed to be saved." Alan took a deep breath, trying to control the anger that was threatening to overwhelm him. "You can't play God, Andre," Alan said, his voice cold. "You can't decide who lives and who dies. This isn't about salvation, it's about your own need for vengeance. You've twisted everything, your grief, your faith, into a justification for murder." Andre's eyes darkened, and for the first time his calm facade cracked. "It wasn't just about vengeance, it was about protection. I had to save this town, Alan, save them from themselves. The dog, Titan, he was the symbol of it all. He carried the curse, the evil that was consuming this place, but I had to destroy that evil. I had to destroy them." Alan's voice grew more forceful. "Titan was never the problem. He was a victim, just like the rest of them. You've manipulated these people with lies and superstition. You've turned their faith into a weapon for your own madness." Andre shook his head slowly, as if Alan were simply too ignorant to understand. "You're wrong," he whispered, his voice trembling with the weight of his convictions. "This was the only way to save them. And now, it's too late to stop it." Alan stepped forward, his heart racing, adrenaline surging through his veins. "It's not too late," he said, his voice low and deadly. "I'm putting an end to this now. You won't hurt anyone else." Andre took a step back, his eyes narrowing. You don't have the power to stop me, Alan, he said coldly. This town is mine. It always has been. Alan's mind was clear now, his anger no longer clouding his judgment. He had to stop Andre once and for all. The Reverend's grip on the town was powerful, but it wasn't invincible. He had used fear, superstition, and his twisted sense of righteousness to control them, but Alan wasn't going to let him continue. This ends tonight, Alan said, his voice firm and unwavering. Andre's expression shifted from calm to something darker, something more dangerous. You can't stop it, he said, his voice filled with a chilling certainty. The cleansing has already begun, and you won't stand in the way of God's will. Alan took one last step forward, his resolve stronger than ever. I'm not standing in the way of God's will, Andre. I'm standing in the way of your madness. The tension in the chapel was unbearable. Andre's eyes locked onto Alan's, and for a moment it felt like the world had frozen around them. The Reverend stood firm, his hands raised as if invoking some unseen force. His face was a mask of cold conviction, his voice carrying the weight of a twisted certainty. The cleansing is inevitable, Alan, Andre said softly, almost lovingly, as though he were speaking to a child. You can't stop this. It is God's will, and the fire will purify us all. Alan's heart pounded. Fire. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. He had known from the moment Andre had begun speaking of salvation that the Reverend's madness would take them to this point, but he hadn't imagined it would come so quickly, so violently. Before Alan could react, Andre turned toward the altar, muttering words that Alan couldn't understand. With swift, practiced movements, he lit a match, tossing it onto a pile of kindling at the foot of the altar. The flames immediately shot up, consuming the dry wood, casting an eerie orange glow over the chapel's dark corners. Let the fire cleanse us all, Andre whispered, his eyes gleaming with fanaticism. Let it burn away the sin. Let it bring forth salvation. Alan rushed forward, his heart racing. The fire had already started. The chapel, a symbol of faith, was now a raging inferno, but something stopped him. Titan. The dog, who had been lying near the altar, suddenly stirred, his eyes wide and alert. The warmth of the flames seemed to trigger something deep inside the animal. Titan stood, a low growl rumbling from his chest, and then, without warning, Titan sprinted toward the back of the chapel. Alan's pulse spiked. The children. He had heard their cries earlier, just before Andre had started the fire. They'd been hidden in the back room, the last remnants of innocence in a place consumed by darkness. Andre had already gone too far. He had already set the wheels of tragedy in motion, but Titan was their chance, their salvation. With no time to waste, Alan ran after the dog, dodging the growing flames that were quickly licking their way up the wooden pews. Titan, now fully awake and aware of the danger, pushed open the back door with his powerful paws. Alan followed, his hands gripping the door frame to keep from being thrown backward by the heat. The crackling fire was deafening now, but Alan's focus remained fixed on Titan, who was already standing by the small room where the children were hiding. Without hesitation, Titan began pulling at the door, his teeth and claws working in tandem to break through. Alan reached them just in time to see the door finally give way, the intense heat threatening to consume everything in its path. "Get out quickly!" Alan shouted, ushering the children toward the door Titan had opened. But the dog wouldn't leave. Titan stood in the doorway, eyes flicking between Alan and the children. He wasn't running away. He was standing guard, ensuring they were safe before anything else. Alan's heart swelled. He didn't know how or why Titan had become the way he was, but at that moment it was clear. Titan wasn't just a dog. He was a protector, a savior. "Go," Alan ordered, pushing the children toward safety. They ran as fast as they could, some of them stumbling over their own feet in fear, but Titan stayed behind, unwilling to leave until Alan gave the command. Alan turned to him, his voice filled with urgency. "Titan, come on!" Titan hesitated for a second, then, with a final glance at Alan, he ran toward the open door just as the flames began to lick at the edges of the chapel's walls. But the heat was unbearable now, the smoke thick, and Alan knew there was no time left. He turned to follow, but as he did, a beam fell from above, crashing down in front of him. The chapel was falling apart. Titan was ahead of him, but there was no way they would make it out unless Alan could reach him. The flames roared as Alan fought his way through the burning wreckage, pushing past fallen beams and searing heat. He could hear Titan's bark echoing through the smoke and flames, a rallying cry, a final push for survival. With one last burst of strength, Alan made it to the front door. Titan was already out, his coat singed but still standing, waiting for Alan to follow. Alan stumbled out of the building, his legs trembling from the effort. He collapsed onto the snow, the cold air hitting his face like a shock. Titan stood by him, his body warm against the icy wind, guarding Alan just as he had protected the children. The fire raged behind them, the chapel burning to the ground, but Titan had saved them all. Alan looked up at the burning remains of the chapel, the flames beginning to subside. "We made it, boy," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "We made it." Titan lowered his head, pressing it gently against Alan's chest, and for the first time Alan allowed himself to breathe a sigh of relief. They had survived. They had faced the fire together. The air was thick with smoke, and the cold had begun to bite through Alan's clothes as he knelt in the snow, his chest heaving. Titan stood beside him, his coat singed, but his presence as steady as ever. The chapel, once a place of faith and hope, was now nothing more than a smoldering ruin behind them. Alan could still feel the heat of the flames on his face, the terrifying rush of adrenaline that had carried him through the inferno. But in the midst of the destruction, there was a moment of silence, a quiet that felt out of place after everything that had happened. The children, rescued from the back room just before the flames overtook them, were huddled together near the edge of the fire's reach, shivering in the cold but alive, thanks to Titan's quick actions. Alan turned to the children, his heart swelling with relief. "You're safe now," he whispered, offering a smile of reassurance. They had escaped the fire and they would survive. But the feeling of victory was bittersweet, for his thoughts still lingered on Andre. As the town's fire crews began to arrive, Alan's gaze turned toward the burning wreckage of the chapel. He could see a figure moving within the flames. The sight stopped him dead in his tracks. It was Andre, the reverend whose twisted belief in divine cleansing had led to the destruction of so many lives, had returned to the flames. His coat flapping in the wind, his body was a dark silhouette against the orange inferno. And then, with a final step toward the altar that had once been his pulpit, Andre disappeared into the flames. Alan's heart skipped a beat as he ran back toward the chapel. The fire crews had barely begun their work, and there was no way they could save Andre now. He was lost, consumed by the very flames he had set in motion, a martyr to his own madness. Should he go back? The question gnawed at Alan. Should he risk his life to pull Andre from the inferno, or had the Reverend sealed his fate with his own hands? Was there any saving a man so consumed by his own delusions? Alan hesitated, his hand hovering over the radio, torn between duty and the knowledge that Andre was beyond redemption. He couldn't save him. Not this time. The Reverend had made his choice long ago, and no matter how much Alan wanted to save him, some people couldn't be reached. Alan turned away, walking back toward the children, his face heavy with the weight of the decision. As he passed the fire truck, the fire chief looked at him with a grim expression. "We'll never get him out of there, deputy," the chief said. "It's too late." Alan nodded silently, the truth settling in his bones. Andre had died a man of his own making. But then Alan looked at the children again, their faces still pale with shock, but filled with hope. They had been given a second chance, and so had the town. For all the darkness that had clouded Hollow Creek, there was still hope, and perhaps a chance for redemption for everyone else. Alan knelt down beside the children, his voice soft but firm. "It's over. You're safe now." Titan, ever watchful, nudged one of the children with his head, as though to reassure them that it was indeed over. The dog's presence, a symbol of loyalty and courage, was the light that Hollow Creek needed to guide them out of the darkness. The townsfolk, many of whom had watched the destruction from the distance, began to approach, their faces a mix of awe and relief. The fire had taken much, but it had also given them the opportunity to heal. As Alan looked at the crowd, he realized that it wasn't just the children who had been saved. The town, too, had been given a chance to start anew, but only if they could accept the truth and forgiveness. The town of Hollow Creek stood in the aftermath of destruction, the ruins of the chapel still smoldering under the cold dawn light. As the fire's final embers crackled in the distance, a new kind of warmth began to settle over the town, one that had been absent for far too long. The townspeople, once divided by fear and superstition, now shared a collective sense of relief, tempered with the knowledge that they had been given a second chance. Alan watched the crowd, the same faces that had once whispered about curses now coming together, their eyes no longer filled with suspicion, but with something deeper, hope. There was work to be done, but Alan knew that it wasn't just the physical repairs that would heal Hollow Creek. It was the healing of hearts and minds, the undoing of years of fear, and the acceptance of truth. As Alan surveyed the people gathering, he noticed that many of them looked at Titan with new eyes. The dog who had once been blamed for the deaths, the dog who had been the symbol of evil in the eyes of so many, was now standing proudly at Alan's side. Titan had saved the children. He had been the one to lead them out of the flames, the one to protect them when no one else could. Now Titan was more than just a dog. He was a symbol of redemption. His presence in Hollow Creek marked a new beginning, not just for the town, but for each person who had ever feared him. Titan approached a small group of children, the same ones he had saved from the flames. The children who had once been afraid of him now rushed to him, their hands outstretched in a mixture of awe and affection. Titan, ever loyal, leaned into their touch, accepting their love with the same quiet grace he had shown Alan. The children, once terrified, were now laughing, their voices high with joy. "Thank you, Titan," one of them whispered, petting the dog's head. Titan lowered his head gently, nuzzling the child's hand in response. It was a moment of pure connection, a reminder of the power of unconditional love and loyalty, both in animals and in humans. Alan felt a tightness in his chest as he watched the exchange. It wasn't just the children who had found healing. The entire town was beginning to accept the dog they had once feared, understanding at last that Titan had been a savior, not a curse. Clara walked up beside Alan, her eyes soft with emotion as she watched Titan with the children. "He's incredible, isn't he?" she said quietly, her voice tinged with admiration. Alan nodded, his gaze fixed on Titan. "He's more than just a dog," he said, his voice thick with gratitude. "He's the reminder we all needed, about loyalty, sacrifice, and the power of forgiveness." Clara smiled gently, her eyes meeting Alan's. "I think we've all learned something from him. He's shown us what it means to fight for what's right, even when it's hard." As the town began to rebuild, both physically and emotionally, Alan and Clara worked side by side. They spoke to the townspeople, helping them to understand that the darkness that had clouded their community was not something they had to carry any longer. The fear, the superstitions, and the anger, they all had to go. Alan knew that there would still be hard times ahead, but he also knew that the road to redemption wasn't easy. It was a journey, and they had just begun. Hollow Creek was beginning to change. The town that had once been suffocated by fear and superstition now stood on the edge of something new. As the days passed, the weight that had clung to the people lifted, replaced by a quiet but determined hope. The dark shadows of the past were slowly being erased, piece by piece, as the community worked together to rebuild not just their homes, but their spirits. Alan walked through the town square, his boots crunching softly on the gravel. The air was crisp, the sky a soft blue, and there was a calmness about the place that had been missing for years. He paused by a group of people working together to repair the local library, an act that seemed small, but Alan knew it was symbolic of the larger change happening. People were no longer avoiding one another. They were joining together, united in a way they hadn't been in years. Titan trotted alongside him, his coat gleaming in the sunlight, no longer the fearful, broken dog the town had once seen, but a symbol of resilience. The dog had become more than just a pet. He was a living, breathing testament to what Hollow Creek had endured and overcome. Wherever Alan went, people smiled at him and Titan, nodding in acknowledgement. They weren't just sheriff and dog anymore. They were part of something much larger, something that had the power to heal the town. As Alan and Titan continued their walk, they saw more evidence of the town's renewal. A few farmers were planting new crops on the fields, something that had been put on hold during the days of fear. Children were laughing and playing in the park, their faces bright with a carefree innocence that hadn't been seen for far too long. Even the church, though still scarred from the fire, was being restored, a new coat of paint brightening its exterior, symbolizing the town's willingness to move forward. In the middle of it all, Alan stood, observing the changes with a quiet sense of pride. He knew that it wasn't just the buildings being rebuilt, it was the people themselves, their belief in one another, and in their ability to overcome. It wasn't an easy journey, and the scars of the past would take time to heal. But for the first time in a long while, there was real tangible hope in Hollow Creek. Alan stopped near the newly planted garden at the edge of the square, where a few of the town's older residents were working together, planting flowers that would bloom in the coming months. Titan sat by Alan's side, his gaze steady and calm, as if he too understood the significance of the moment. Clara joined them a few moments later, her smile warm and genuine. She had been there every step of the way, helping not just the town, but Alan himself, as they navigated through the painful journey of exposing the truth and rebuilding from the ashes. "This place," Clara said, looking around at the people working together, "it feels different now." Alan nodded, his gaze softening as he watched a mother lift her child onto her shoulders, both of them laughing. "It's not just the buildings," he said quietly, "it's the people. They're learning to trust each other again, and trust themselves." Titan wagged his tail as if in agreement. The town's recovery wasn't immediate. It wasn't without its challenges, but there was a sense of peace now. A peace that had been hard-earned and that felt like it had taken root deep in the soil of Hollow Creek. The darkness had been pushed back, and the light of unity, forgiveness, and hope began to shine through. For the first time in a long while, Alan allowed himself to relax, to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could stay this way. There would always be struggles ahead, always things to overcome. But the people of Hollow Creek had learned an important lesson. They were stronger together, and they could face whatever came next with courage, love, and the unwavering loyalty of those like Titan. The morning sun had risen high over Hollow Creek, casting its golden rays across the town as if to bathe it in a sense of renewal. There was a quiet hum of life in the air, the sound of children playing in the park, the rhythmic tapping of tools as people worked on repairs, and the soft rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. The scars of the past were still there, but they were no longer the focus of the town. Instead, it was the beauty of the present, the hope of what was yet to come, that took center stage. Alan, Titan, and Clara walked side by side down the main street, their footsteps light and unhurried. The air was fresh, tinged with the scent of pine and freshly turned earth. Titan, ever watchful, walked at Alan's side, his eyes scanning their surroundings, a quiet sentinel as always, yet there was a calmness in the dog's steps that spoke of peace, peace he had earned through his courage and loyalty. Alan smiled as Titan paused to sniff a patch of grass, his ears perked up in that way dogs have when they're content. Clara, walking beside Alan, noticed the smile and followed his gaze. "He's happy," she remarked, a soft smile playing on her lips. "You both are." Alan nodded, his heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and relief. I think we both are. I never thought I'd find peace in a place like this. He glanced down at Titan, who had now turned his attention to a butterfly fluttering by. But there's something about him. Titan's shown me that even in the darkest times, there's always a way forward. Clara looked at the dog, her expression softening. You've both been through so much together. It's hard not to feel the bond between you. Alan chuckled, shaking his head. I never thought I'd be so attached to a dog, but there's no mistaking it. Titan is more than just a companion. He's become a part of who I am, part of the reason I'm still here, still fighting. Titan, as if sensing the conversation, looked up at Alan, his amber eyes locking with Alan's. In that moment, there was no need for words. The bond between man and dog was deep, unspoken, and undeniable. Titan's loyalty wasn't just in his actions, it was in the quiet moments like these, where his presence brought a sense of calm and understanding that Alan had never known before. Clara smiled, sensing the quiet strength between them. You've both come a long way. The town's beginning to heal, but so are you, Alan, and Titan, together. Alan's gaze softened as he looked at her, his heart filled with a quiet sense of gratitude. I couldn't have done it without him, Alan admitted, his voice steady but filled with emotion. And I couldn't have done it without you, Clara. You've been here every step of the way. Clara gave him a nod, her smile warm but tinged with a hint of sadness. We all have our part to play, Alan. You've done yours. You've led this town through the darkness, and now you get to enjoy the light. They walked in silence for a moment, the peacefulness of the town wrapping around them like a blanket. The laughter of children echoed in the distance, the sound of hope being reborn with every step. The town had weathered the storm, and now it was time for the sun to shine on Hollow Creek once more. Alan looked down at Titan, his loyal companion, his friend. We've both come a long way, haven't we, boy? Titan responded with a soft bark, his tail wagging gently. In that moment, Alan knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would face them with Titan by his side. The bond they shared was stronger than any curse, any fear, and it was a bond that would carry them forward together. As they continued their walk, Clara by their side, Alan couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of peace. There was still much to be done, but for the first time in a long while, Alan knew they were on the right path. The sun was shining brightly over Hollow Creek, casting a warm glow over the small town as the community began to rebuild. The ruins of the chapel, once consumed by flames, were now a symbol of what had been lost, but also of what had been found. People from all corners of the town had gathered, working together to restore the house of worship that had once been the heart of the community. Alan watched as the townsfolk, many of whom had been distant and afraid not so long ago, now worked side by side, lifting beams and placing bricks. They were no longer strangers to each other, not bound by fear and superstition, but united in a shared purpose. The sound of hammering, the murmur of conversations, and the laughter of children filled the air as Hollow Creek slowly began to breathe life again. Titan stood at Alan's side, ever vigilant as the workers continued their efforts. The dog's coat, now healed and gleaming in the sunlight, was a testament to his strength. Titan had become a living symbol of resilience, just as the town had become. Clara walked up beside Alan, her face bright with a quiet pride. It's incredible, isn't it? She said, her voice filled with awe. They've come so far so quickly. Alan nodded, watching the workers with a deep sense of gratitude. They've had to, he said quietly. This town has seen too much darkness, but now it's time for the light to shine again. The chapel was taking shape once more, the skeleton of the new building standing strong against the sky. As the walls were rebuilt, a new sense of hope was growing in the hearts of the people. The town's faith, broken by fear and manipulation, was being restored brick by brick. Alan could feel the shift in the air, a shift towards something better, something stronger. One of the town's older residents, Earl Mathers, approached Alan with a weathered smile. "Deputy," he said, nodding toward the chapel, "we never thought we'd see this day, did we?" Alan smiled, his heart lighter than it had been in a long time. "I didn't think we would either," he said. "But here we are." Earl chuckled, his eyes glinting with something like relief. "I never thought much of that, Reverend, but I was too afraid to speak up. We all were. It's good to see the town coming back together." The workers continued their labor, their efforts seemingly fueled by something more than just the need to rebuild a building. There was a spirit of renewal in the air, something intangible but powerful. The town was no longer afraid of the ghosts of its past. They were putting the pieces back together, and each nail driven into the wood, each brick placed in the wall, was a declaration of their strength, their unity, and their determination to move forward. Alan looked over at Titan, who was standing still, watching the workers with a quiet, knowing gaze. It struck Alan again how much this dog had come to represent. Titan was no longer just a victim. He was a symbol of everything Hollow Creek had been through and everything it was becoming. "We've all been given a second chance," Alan said quietly to Clara, his voice thick with emotion. This is the real rebirth." Clara smiled, her eyes soft. "Yes, it is. And it's all thanks to the people of this town, to the ones who stayed and fought for it. They're building something stronger now, something better." As the day wore on and the sun began to set, the first signs of a new chapel stood proud against the horizon. It was more than just a building. It was a testament to what the town had survived, what it had learned, and what it was now capable of. Alan stood there with Titan by his side, watching the community work together. For the first time in a long while, he could see the town of Hollow Creek for what it was meant to be, a place of hope, of unity, and of healing. The evening sun bathed Hollow Creek in a warm golden light, casting long shadows over the freshly rebuilt chapel. The town was changing, not just in its streets and buildings, but in its people. Alan and Clara stood side by side, watching the workers putting the final touches on the chapel, their movements purposeful and confident. It was no longer just about bricks and mortar. It was about rebuilding trust, mending broken spirits, and finding peace. Clara glanced at Alan, her expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking a lot about forgiveness lately," she said softly, her eyes resting on Titan, who was standing at their feet, his gaze as steady as ever. "About how difficult it is, but how necessary it is for healing." Alan looked at Clara, his expression a mix of understanding and empathy. "I think we all have to learn to forgive, Clara, not just the ones who've wronged us, but also ourselves. Titan, he's been through so much, and yet he's given the town a chance to start over. His loyalty, his willingness to trust again, it's something we all need to learn." Clara nodded, her voice quiet, as she added, "He's not just a dog anymore. He's a symbol of loyalty, forgiveness, and redemption. He's shown us that no matter what's been done to us, we can still choose to love, to protect, to move forward." Alan's gaze drifted to Titan, who had been quietly observing the town's rebuilding efforts, his tail gently wagging every now and then. There was something about the dog's quiet presence, the way he watched over everyone with unwavering trust. Alan's heart swelled with pride. Titan had taught him more than any human could about courage, sacrifice, and most importantly, forgiveness. As they stood there in comfortable silence, a group of townsfolk approached them. Alan recognized a few familiar faces, people who had once whispered about the cursed dog, who had feared Titan as a symbol of death. They were hesitant, but there was a noticeable shift in the air as they walked closer. One man, Gary Miller, stepped forward. His face was drawn, and his eyes were filled with a mix of guilt and remorse. "Deputy Bennett," he said, his voice thick with emotion, I want to apologize for everything, for what we said about Titan, for the way we treated him. We were wrong." Alan's eyes softened. "It's all right," he said quietly, his voice calm but firm. "Titan's forgiven you long ago. Gary nodded, tears welling in his eyes. But we were the ones who needed to forgive, not just you or Titan, but ourselves. We let fear rule us. We let the darkness take over, and we hurt the one thing that was only trying to help us. Behind Gary, the rest of the group stood, their faces a mixture of shame and acceptance. They too stepped forward one by one, offering their apologies. Some whispered quiet words, others spoke more openly, their voices thick with the weight of their regrets. One elderly woman, Mabel, stepped forward, her hands clasped together. We didn't understand, Alan. We were so caught up in our own fear that we turned against the very thing that was sent to protect us. I'm so sorry, Titan. Her voice cracked with emotion. And to you, Alan, I'm sorry for not trusting you, for letting superstition cloud my judgment. Titan, ever the patient listener, lowered his head and gently nuzzled Mabel's hand, as if to show her that he had already forgiven her. The woman gasped softly, her tears falling freely as she stroked Titan's fur. Alan watched the scene unfold, a lump forming in his throat. For all the pain, for all the fear that had clouded this town's heart, there was forgiveness in the air now. It was a slow process, a difficult one, but it was happening. The town was learning to accept and move forward. Alan turned to Clara, his eyes reflecting the depth of the moment. This is what it's all about, isn't it? The real healing. Clara smiled, a quiet but genuine smile. Yes, forgiveness is the first step. The town has a long way to go, but they're on the right path now. And Titan... She paused, looking down at the dog, who had now sat calmly at their feet. Titan will be their guide. Alan nodded, his heart full. We all have our part to play, and Titan, he's shown us the way. As the townsfolk continued to offer their apologies, Alan knew that the journey of healing had just begun. There would still be challenges ahead, but the town of Hollow Creek had taken its first step toward redemption, and nothing would ever be the same again. The sun had nearly set, casting a warm amber glow across Hollow Creek as the last of the townsfolk made their way toward Alan and Clara. The air was thick with the remnants of what had been, and yet there was a sense of peace, something the town had longed for but had never quite attained until now. Alan stood at the edge of the gathering, watching the final few townspeople approach. There was a shift in the air, a quiet hum of change. The anger and fear that had once permeated the community had been replaced by something more healing, forgiveness. And although the healing process would take time, Alan could feel it in his bones. The town was finally ready to face what they had done and to move forward. Among the last to approach was Jacob Price, the town's blind elder, who had always been known for his sharp wit and unwavering convictions. Jacob had been one of the loudest voices when the town had first blamed Titan for their misfortunes. His harsh words had echoed through the streets, condemning the dog and fueling the hysteria. But now, he approached with a slower gait, his usually confident steps faltering. Alan and Clara stood together, watching as Jacob stopped a few feet away, his weathered face creased with regret. He held his cane loosely in one hand, the other held out slightly, almost as though unsure of how to proceed. Deputy, Jacob began, his voice low and heavy. Clara, I owe you both an apology. I've said things I shouldn't have, things that hurt and things that weren't true. His voice cracked, the weight of his guilt evident in every word. Alan said nothing for a moment, watching the old man with a quiet understanding. Jacob had been one of the loudest in his accusations, but now, here he was, standing before them, acknowledging his wrongs. The transformation was striking. I condemned the dog without understanding him, Jacob continued, his words slow and deliberate. I let fear take control of my heart. I let the stories and the rumors cloud my judgment, and I caused harm where there was none. And for that, I am deeply sorry. His voice softened as he spoke directly to Titan, who sat quietly at Alan's side, his head turned toward the old man. Titan raised his head slightly, his amber eyes steady and calm. It was as though he understood what Jacob was offering, forgiveness. The dog remained still, offering no sign of hostility, only the silent strength of loyalty and compassion. Clara stepped forward, her expression warm but understanding. It's not just about Titan, Jacob, it's about the community. You've carried the same burden as the rest of us, but we have to let it go. The only way forward is through forgiveness. Jacob nodded, his head bowed in silent remorse. I never meant for any of this to happen. The fear, the superstition, it's clouded all of us. But I see now what I should have seen before. Titan wasn't the curse, he's the cure, and I'm sorry for the pain I caused. Alan watched as Jacob reached down, his hands trembling as he slowly extended one toward Titan. The dog stood, but instead of retreating, he stepped closer, allowing Jacob to stroke his fur gently. It was a simple gesture, but one that spoke volumes. The town had feared this dog, had turned on him in their darkest moments. But here, in this quiet moment, they were able to recognize him for what he truly was, a symbol of forgiveness. Alan stood still, his heart swelling with emotion. He had known that forgiveness would come, but seeing it in action, seeing the change in the hearts of the people, was something he would never forget. He turned to Clara, meeting her gaze. There was no need for words. They both knew that the town had turned a corner, that the healing process had truly begun. The people of Hollow Creek were no longer bound by the chains of fear and superstition. They were moving toward hope, toward unity. Alan turned back to Jacob, his voice low but filled with compassion. We've all made mistakes, Jacob, but the important part is that we've learned from them. We're moving forward, together. Jacob's smile was small but genuine. Thank you, Alan. And Titan. I see now that some things are worth more than fear. Titan gave a soft, gentle bark, his tail wagging once. It was as if the dog understood that this moment was important, that the town had finally learned what it meant to forgive, to accept, and to move forward. As the sun sank lower behind the hills, the town of Hollow Creek stood in a new light, one filled with understanding, with acceptance, and with the promise of a better tomorrow. The town of Hollow Creek had finally found its peace. The transformation was palpable in the air. The way the people moved, the way they spoke, the way they interacted with each other. It was as though a heavy weight had been lifted from their shoulders, and for the first time in a long while they could breathe freely. The road ahead was not without its challenges, but there was a sense of unity now, a strength that had come from embracing the lessons learned through hardship. Alan stood with Clara at the edge of the town, looking out over the valley. The new chapel, still under construction, stood tall against the horizon, its structure reaching toward the sky like a symbol of the town's resilience. The chapel was no longer just a building. It had become a beacon of hope, a reminder that Hollow Creek had faced its darkest days and had emerged stronger. Beside them, Titan stood, his eyes scanning the landscape with quiet determination. The dog had become more than just a companion. He had become a symbol of rebirth, of the power of loyalty, sacrifice, and unconditional love. Titan's presence had guided them through the storm, and now he stood as the living proof that even in the face of fear, there was always a way forward. The dog had shown the town what it meant to forgive, to stand by those who needed it most, and to keep moving forward despite the odds. He's really something, isn't he? Clara said softly, her voice filled with admiration as she looked down at Titan. He's not just a dog, he's the heart of this town now. Alan smiled, his heart swelling with pride. He's more than that, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He's the embodiment of everything this town has learned. Resilience, courage, love. Titan gave us all a second chance. Clara nodded, a quiet understanding passing between them. The town had been fractured, divided by fear and superstition, but Titan had led them out of that darkness. His loyalty and courage had been a guiding light, showing them that sometimes the most profound miracles didn't come from divine intervention, but from the unwavering faith and love of those around you. Alan looked out across the town, where the townspeople were busy with their daily tasks. They were rebuilding, not just their homes, but their lives. The fields were being planted, the streets were filled with the sound of children's laughter, and the chapel's restoration was slowly but surely taking shape. Hollow Creek had become a place of healing, a place where forgiveness had taken root, and where people were learning to accept one another, flaws and all. He turned to Clara, his gaze softening. You know, sometimes we look for miracles in the wrong places. We wait for signs from above, for something grand to happen, but the real miracles are right in front of us. They're in the small acts of kindness, in the loyalty of a dog, in the forgiveness of a community. That's what truly changes the world. Clara smiled, her eyes meeting his. You're right. The miracles are here, in the people, in the love they share, in the forgiveness they offer. They stood together, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon, the soft glow of twilight painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. It was the dawn of a new day for Hollow Creek, a day filled with possibility, hope, and a newfound belief that no matter the past, the future could be better. Titan looked up at them, his amber eyes filled with a quiet understanding. He was their guide, their symbol of hope, and Alan knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. Alan placed a hand gently on Titan's head, his voice soft. We've come a long way, haven't we, boy? Titan's tail wagged slowly, the simple gesture speaking volumes. And so the journey continued. The end. Or perhaps just the beginning. The story of Titan and Hollow Creek is a powerful reminder of the unwavering loyalty and unconditional love that animals, particularly German shepherds, bring into our lives. Titan, once seen as a symbol of fear and superstition, became the beacon of hope, forgiveness, and redemption for an entire community. His courage, loyalty, and willingness to protect those in need embody the qualities we all strive for in our own lives. Through Titan, we see that love knows no boundaries. It transcends past mistakes, fear, and misunderstandings. This story isn't just about a dog, it's about the lessons animals teach us every day, the value of resilience, trust, and forgiveness. The bond between humans and animals, particularly loyal dogs like the German Shepherd, has the power to heal wounds, mend broken hearts, and restore faith in humanity. At the heart of this story is the reminder that sometimes the greatest acts of courage and kindness come from those who cannot speak but communicate through their actions. Titan, through his presence, changed the lives of those around him, proving that love and loyalty can transform even the darkest of times into moments of light and hope. As we reflect on this journey, let us remember the importance of caring for the animals in our lives, recognizing their unwavering loyalty and the deep emotional connections they offer. May we, like Titan, strive to be symbols of compassion, resilience, and love for those who need it most. Just as Hollow Creek found its redemption, we too can find healing in the bonds we share with the animals who give us so much.